Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kendar, the Tiger Knights, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you are looking to support me, that is, on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 79 of Breaking Step. Cold. He was so cold. Fire had consumed all the heat within him and left Tibs shivering on his knees. He remembered this feeling well from that first time. At least this time, pain wasn't snapping at the heel of the gently retreating cold. There was nothing to accompany the slowing shivers. As with that time, there were certain voices that accompanied the roaring of fire. Only now he was terrified. They might have been screaming, calling for him to stop, calling to him in pain, and that when the voices had stopped, it was because his friends had also died. Because his friends had also ended. Somewhere along that, he'd pulled his sense in. And now he couldn't bring himself to extend it. To find out he was the only person in the room, that his team had paid the price for what he'd done. Tibs? He stared at the hand on his shoulder, blistered but whole, the burned armor on the arms and jackal. His face also blistered, looking at him in concern. You survived. His voice sounded as hollow as he felt. You were strong enough. One of them. One out of them. No, one of them. He should be happy. Jekyll had survived, but he had been the strongest, and Tibs had still hurt him. What had he left of Maz and Cumdar, if any? Jekyll's snort broke the thought. I was in no shape to do anything. You're the one who kept the fire from burning us. The fighter looked at his blistered hand, the mostly burned armor, but it did get really hot. He tried to keep fire focused on the creature, on Stowe, on what made him angry and away from his team, but fire consumed without care, and Tibbs eventually lost himself in the rage and he fed it. Somewhere, along with pulling his sense in, he'd forgotten about his friends. Tibbs? The hand shook him. Jekyll raised Tibbs's head so he would look into those earth-brown eyes, then turn it to show him Mez and Cumdar, smoking, but looking less burned than the fighter. He grabbed onto Jackal, held tight. I thought fire had eaten you. I thought fire had eaten you with everything else, he said between sobbed in the soot-covered armor. It got close, Mez said, but I think that even if I hadn't kept most of it from me and Cumdar, we wouldn't have looked worse than he does right now. In your dreams, the fighter replied. You'll never look this good even after Tibs fixes you up. I tried so hard to keep you safe. You succeeded, Cumdar said. It is not how inherently strong each of us is that accounts for our survival, Tibbs. You did this to a dungeon room. If your will hadn't been on protecting us as well, there would be nothing left of us. Tibbs shook his head vehemently. He didn't deserve praise. He had stopped thinking about them. He had let them. His head was pulled away from Jekyll's chest, none too gently. You controlled it, the cleric said, tone harsh. Do not let your fear of what might have happened cloud your mind to what did. He moved aside as he spoke. You are the one who protected us. No matter how deep your fear of fire is, you maintained control. There was nothing left in the room. There was barely a room to speak of. The walls were bowed out, black and cracked in place, revealing the deeper part of the walls, the part that weren't stone, that might be what Stowe was made of. The destruction of the floor ended a few paces away from him and his friends, an uneven line marking where each had been. It wasn't clear. Fire had bit further in places, close enough to blacken the floor fingers away from where Maz had been, but it hadn't reached him. Of the creature, the table, the papers, there was no trace. Not even ash. Had still absorbed them already? Or had fire simply not left anything behind to be absorbed? Did we win? He asked. Dismay at the desolation tinting his voice. The point of the room, desolation. No, that's not. Desolation is not. Desolation. The disappointment. This the disappointment. Okay. The disappointment tinting his voice. The point of the room had been to work out the puzzle, but there was nothing left. You defeated the boss, Jekyll said. That's a win in my book. He looked around. But I think you destroyed the loot chest, too. Tibbs looked down. Sorry. You kept us from dying. Jekyll squeezed his shoulder. I'll take that over loot. Tibbs nodded, trying to feel good about what he'd done. He had kept his team alive. The 5 of them were... Don! Did we free him? He was on his feet while the others exchanged worried look, then had to keep from moving as his equilibrium wasn't as fast as he was yet. Then they were all moving. Jekyll cursed and shivered as they stepped outside. How? So how? Okay. As they stepped outside, this is the end of a period. Oh, actually. Jekyll cursed and shivered as they stepped outside, confirming that how cold the corridor wasn't in Tibbs's imagination. Sensing back into the room, it still had a lot of fire essence. So he absorbed that, and as much as it barely added anything to his nearly empty reserve. He couldn't avoid sensing his friends in the process, and like they'd all said, they were in good shape. The purity weaves he'd applied on each had continued their work, and only with Jackal Tibbs suspected only with Jekyll did Tibbs suspect it hadn't been enough to do much for his burns on top of healing the extensive damage it had been working on. He used some of the essence he'd gained to apply more weaves on each of them, but kept them small, preferring to be ready to defend them. The hallway was devoid of anything in a way that felt odd. No doors open in an ambush masquerading as people not expecting intruders. Tibbs couldn't even sense people golem in the room. In the rooms, carefully opening a door revealed a completely empty room. Not even the desk where the golem people had pretended to work were there. Were there. By the time they reached the bottom of the stair, where the table and trays were absent, even Jackal was on edge. Where are the creatures? He grumbled as they exited the room. Running, echoing along the wall, had Mez raise his bow. An arrow flickered, then its essence fell apart, and the archer hurried to pull one from his quiver. Tibbs started to push fire essence into the bow, only for the runner to reach the edge of his tighter sense. Then Tibbs was running. Tibbs! Jekyll called, then ran, and then they too ran. Tibbs grabbed onto the sorcerer as Don rounded a corner. You're okay. Corruption bloomed around them and was immediately absorbed by Don. Yes. Don sounded unsure, and when Tibbs let go, he looked uncomfortable. How did you get free? Mez asked. I didn't. Don looked them over. The building groaned, then everyone and everything just broke down, and I was free. Something tell me Tibbs did it. I might have broken something, Tibbs admitted. Don chuckled. I'd say that's impossible, but it isn't the first such thing you've done. His expression sobered. Why aren't you all healed? Why haven't you healed them? I added a weave, but I wanted to keep most of the essence I have left in case we were attacked. We're all drained. We'll heal, Jekyll said, urging them along. But how about we get out of here? Without those tellers jumping out of the room trying to kill us, this place feels creepy. Any idea how Tibbs breaking one room caused this to the rest of the building? Mez asked Don, and the sorcerer shook his head. Outside, the others shielded their eyes. How is it so strong? Jekyll asked. Essence, Tibbs and Don replied in unison. But it isn't that strong, the sorcerer continued. It's simply the difference going from inside to outside, same as when you leave the inn in the sun high. In the high sun. We're still inside, the fighter pointed out. What's our next destination? Don asked Tibbs, ignoring the comment. Somewhere to rest and eat, Jekyll replied. Is there such a is such a place possible within the dungeon? We've passed plazas on the way here with nothing in them, Don said. Some even had tables and chairs. We'll need to stay on guard for those dogs, Jekyll shuddered, but lead us to the closest. Jekyll dropped on the bench and took packages from his pouch, handing them out, and immediately started on his. You ate this pastry, Mess said. How are you hungry already? Jekyll snorted. That was a while back, he said between bites of bread and vegetables. Then there was that fighting. How are you not hungry? I am. I just don't feel the need to be done before I even started. I want to be done before we have to fight, the fighter said. I'm just glad Russell had an alternative to Comdar's proposal, Don said. As to the kind of food we should pack. Travel bread is a perfectly valid food when one travels extensively, the cleric replied, sounding slightly miffed to Tibbs. I nearly broke the side of the table knocking it against. Wow. Yeah, well, I nearly broke the side of the table I knocked it against. I knocked it against, Jekyll said. That's no longer bread. It is made to survive journeys, not appeal to your sense of what bread is. It, in an oiled pack, along with access to water, will ensure you survive to reach the next city. You'll probably want to die before that, Jekyll commented before returning to devouring the food. Look, I appreciate the work that goes into making food that needs to survive for the weeks between towns, Don said, and that taste had to be sacrificed for it. But this is just one day, so I wasn't sacrificing it if I had to. And how would you be aware of what is needed to prepare such food? Comdar asked. The sorcerer shrugged. Read a book on it when I was reading everything I could get my hands on. You think the dungeon is going to put bags that keep food good in the loot? Jekyll asked. So casually, Tibbs glared at him. What? He raised a soggy piece of bread. This is vegetable water. I don't mind my bread soaked in meat juices, but vegetable water is for soup. It's for the soup other people eat. There's no way to know how a dungeon will take the loot will make the loot. There's no way to know how a dungeon makes the loot we find, Dunn said, while Tibbs still glared, let alone how it decides it. Tibbs kicked Jackal in the shin as he opened his mouth. Right. Such an item can be purchased, Comdar said, but only the wealthiest of travelers benefit from them. Did you eat a lot of those while you traveled? Jekyll asked. The cleric considered something. I had to. I endeavored to travel with caravans when possible, as part of repayment for guarding it is our feeding, but circumstances made such impossible on many an occasion. There were more than one journey early in my travels when surviving required digging out and eating worms. Discovering travel bread meant never again did I have to experience the delicacy that is worm. I'd have eaten that, Tibbs said. On my street, worms sound better than some things I had to eat. Then let's rejoice that never again shall any of us have to eat those kind of things. Um, okay, you know what? This need this needs to be rephrased because this is definitely in Kumdar's voice, and it's supposed to be Jackal. Then rejoice. Ah, then it's a good thing we'll never have. Then it's a good thing we'll never have to eat stuff like that. And it's a good thing we'll never have to eat stuff like that. Jekyll reached for a non-existent tankard and raised it. You think there's a water fountain somewhere? Mez asked. Back home, I could find one every few blocks. Again, you forget, Kumdar said, before Tibs could point out he could make water for them, even tankards to drink it out of, that this is not a city. It is but a simulacrum of one created by a dungeon. How would a dungeon know to provide water for the creatures it made to exist within it? They do not need it, as they are not alive. He chewed. They are no more than the buildings surrounding us, save that they can move. Well, Jekyll said, wiping wetness off the oiled cloth with a finger. I still say it's inconsiderate of it not to think of us. Tibs, Don said, cutting Mez's response to the fighter. I don't know if you want to talk about this here, since we aren't alone, but I have questions about something you said before. Tibs shrugs. I don't have secrets from anyone here. He ignored Kumdar's raised eyebrow. He wasn't keeping secrets from his friends. If he, like any of them, wanted to know something, they just had to ask. Don also raised one, but his eyes flicked up. Tibs shrugged. There was nothing he said. There was nothing he said he wanted kept from Stowe. He said that fire hurt you unless you used your essence to protect yourself. How can it be if none of the other elements you have hurt you? You said you had a sword planted through your chest, and other than the holes in your armor, there weren't any marks. I don't know. The only clue I have is that fire told me I broke a rule when I had an audience, and that there would be consequences. How could you break a rule? Don't ask. I've never read anything about rules governing how an audience is obtained. It's just conventions established by the guild. Like books can be trusted, Chico said, taking out another package of food. I had it inside a dungeon, Tibbs replied, cutting off Don's angry reply. He made it happen. Don's head snapped at Tibbs. Surprised, then his brow furrowed. How does that break any rules? But then again, it's not like anyone researched this, since audiences are always performed at locations the guide has established. Except for Purity, Kumdar said. They have a dungeon where all those chosen to serve undergo their trial. Succeeding result in achieving an audience. But those are clerics, just based on on what you told me about how you went about getting yours. It shows they don't do it the same as the rest of us. Not everyone with purity has their element is a cleric. Fighters and archers will be among them also. Rogues too, Tibbs said. They just don't talk about it. Except with you, Don replied, it seems. Tibbs shrugged. I'm a rogue. I think they expected me to have figured it out by then. So your audience with fire was in a dungeon, Don mused. Did Purity warn you that you'd broken a rule? He tried to remember the details. But that audience had been a while ago. I don't think so. Then does an attack from the sorcerer trailed off. Right. Purity is about healing, not hurting. Tibbs stayed silent. Don hadn't been at Karina's funeral. He hadn't seen the clerics use their essence to reduce her body to nothing but the elements. Purity was like every other element. It could do anything if someone knew how to etch or weave it. I'd like to try some things after the run, if you don't mind, Tibs. Do they involve using fire on me? Don opened, then closed his mouth. I have enough fire on my own. I'm not interested in adding to it. Aren't you curious as to what your limits are? Don asked. Tibs stared at him. I broke part of the dungeon. I don't want to find out that's not the most dangerous thing I can do. And that concludes chapter 79 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe, hit the bell. If you want to read this story, it is up for free on Royal Road along with the other books in the series. If you want to support me, that is on my Patreon. And if you are looking to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.